I'm so excited to introduce our next speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Robert J. Darling. And just listen to this. He is a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Marine Corps and the author of 24 Hours Inside the President's Bunker, 9/11/2001, the White House. Lieutenant Colonel Darling flew attack helicopters in Desert Shield and Desert Storm during the first Gulf War and in Somalia, Africa, in support of Operation Restore Hope. In June 1998, he was selected to fly as a presidential pilot with Marine Helicopter Squadron 1, and in October 2000, he was handpicked to work for the White House Military Office Airlift Operations Department. It was in that capacity that Lieutenant Colonel Darling supported the President, Vice President, and National Security Advisor in the President's Emergency Operations Center on September 11th, 2001. We all know how it felt on that day. And the man that's going to speak to us today was there. So I hope that you all give him your undivided attention, because that has had everlasting effects on our country. And I want to thank you for what you've done. God bless you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. God bless. Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wow. Okay, let me just tell you right off the bat, you screwed it up. My mama told me after the standing ovation, stop talking. I'm done. So thank you very much. That was really nice. I appreciate that. I'm coming down to be with all of you. I asked for a lavalier mic for that reason. I like to tell you this story up close and personal. KACo, thank you for allowing me to be with you today. Sonia, thank you for inviting me out here to stand with all of you as I share this story of what it was like to stand shoulder to shoulder with our nation's highest leaders as the attack on our country was taking place in September 11th, 2001. But before I dive in, I got to tell you, I came last night, I checked into the hotel, I asked where should I go get something to eat, and I went across the street to Slinky's or whatever it was, and I met a nice gentleman named Elbert. And Elbert introduced me to Taylor Straight Bourbon, something whiskey right here, and my life has changed forever. Thank you, Elbert. I am now in the straight line whiskey business. That was some great stuff. What a great evening I had with Elbert and Mason. So thank you all very much for that. I told him I would give him a shout out this morning. He personalized and gave me his pocket knife, hoping I would get arrested by TSA on my way home. I had to give it back to him and ask him to mail it me. Okay, let's dive in. Listen, I joined the Marine Corps right out of college in 1987, became an attack helicopter pilot. I flew the AH-1W, 2 pilots, all the weapons we can carry. We went to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, came back Somalia, Africa. They made me a Cobra flight instructor, a recruiter, and then in 1998, I was selected to fly President Bill Clinton around. I thought I was going to hate that job. You can't yank and bank, you can't swear in front of the president, you got to get dressed up, you really got to be on your best behavior. Turns out, I loved it. What people don't realize is President Clinton came out of the White House, he climbed up Marine One, he went right to the cockpit, he looked right at you. He shook your hand, and for a brief moment, he was so engaging, you thought you and the President of the United States just might be buds. Hillary, not so much. And I don't tell you that to pick on Hillary. She was steering young Chelsea by the shoulders, up the stairs, hard right-hand turn, no hello, no goodbye, terrible mood. We didn't take it personally. We assumed he made her that way. It really had nothing to do with us. And we flew the president. In October of 2000, the squadron commanding officer came over to me and said, I got a great deal for you. You're my guy. Go up, suit and tie, work in the White House, airlift operations. What people don't realize is our president, the leader of the free world, he only rides in our helicopters, speaks on our phones, driven in our limousines, protected by Secret Service, seen by our doctors, the whole package. He's the only person in the world that gets that. And because we can't outrun Air Force One, we have to pre-position all that equipment in advance of Air Force One. So let me give you an example. Our president is going to go Japan, Korea, and then China. I'll put 500 people and all those assets in Alaska so Air Force One can safely refuel. I have another 500 people and all those assets waiting for him in Japan. I'll airlift Alaska, move it to Korea, airlift Korea, move it to China, re-airlift Korea, move it to Hawaii. We'll ask the Department of Defense to move guided missile destroyers around the Pacific Ocean so we could keep our president in a missile bubble. Should anyone ever try to fly too close to the President of the United States, we can engage them well before they get there. No other world leader gets that. When President Putin comes to America, he flies in our helicopters, he's driven in our limousines, he's allowed to have his Secret Service protect him, but everything else is provided by the United States. That was our job in airlift operations, to move all that equipment in advance of the president. So the minute he got off Air Force One, we were all rehearsed, in place, ready to go, so he can execute his agenda and we can make sure that happens seamlessly. September 11th, 2001, I was the airlift operations officer in charge. I had moved all the equipment to Sarasota. We're monitoring the president's schedule. He was supposed to be wheels up on Air Force One about 1 o'clock that afternoon when everything changed. And I'm going to take you through it. I'm going to inject some humor. It's a pretty heavy speech. It is about our country. It is our history. It is why we are here today. But let me give you the bottom line up front. It's organizations just like this that make our country truly great. Sure, we're a military superpower, but on 9/11, we learned firsthand that the greatness of America doesn't lie in our weapon systems. It lies in our people. People who are willing to fight back on airplanes, go inside burning towers, rescue their friends over at the Pentagon. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things to save each other. Where do we get that resilience? We get it from organizations like this who bring people together, not just to meet each other, but to find out what they need. So if there's any portion of this state in trouble or in need, assets, resources, money, and people will show up the next day to fill sandbags and do whatever it takes to get you back on your feet. This is the greatness of our country, and that's why I wanted to be here today with all of you. Okay, let's dive in. My first slide, really very important. There's only 2 people in the U.S. government who can give offensive, lethal instructions to the U.S. military. Anyone can defend themselves. But if we're going to cross a border, kill a terrorist, wipe out an army, it better come from the National Command Authority. Our National Command Authority is made up of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense. The President was in the Emma E. Booker Elementary School. Our Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, was eventually in the National Military Command Center, and everyone else is in support of those 2 individuals. Our Vice President was in the White House. Dr. Rice was in the White House. I put General Shelton, United States Army, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was out of the country, but he was in the process of turning over his post as Chairman to General Richard Myers, United States Air Force. General Myers was attending a congressional breakfast that morning on Capitol Hill. I'm in the Eisenhower building, 4th floor, overlooking the West Wing. Someone came running into our office and said, "Hey, quick, sir, turn on CNN. Apparently a small airplane just struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex." Like all of you, we trickled over to the TV set. We're looking at that first photo. Why would a pilot careen into a 110-story landmark on such a clear blue crystal day in the city of Manhattan? He literally has the Hudson River to his left, the East River to his right, and most of us could glide and reach LaGuardia Airport. It's that close. There's got to be a lot more of this story than we know. All of a sudden, our phones are ringing. It's American Airlines Flight 11. It departed out of Boston Logan Airport on its way out to California. It went lost communications over Albany, New York, down the Hudson River at over 500 miles an hour and into the North Tower at 8:46. While the world watched, to include all of us in airlift operations, we saw United Airlines Flight 175 come into view. I remember yelling up at the TV set going, "Hey, what's this moron doing?" Trying to get a good look at the hole in the North Tower before he circles to land at LaGuardia Airport, and we all watched it careen into the South Tower at what looked like full power to us. Just then, my boss, Air Force, full bird colonel, ran into airlift operations. He goes, everyone stop what you're doing. Eyeballs on me. We have a full-blown terrorist event unfolding right before our eyes in the city of New York. Stand by for a lot of White House designated missions. Well, what does that mean? Whenever we have a national tragedy in our country, every government agency has got expertise and resources and some role to play. And they all end up calling the Department of Defense for airlift support. Well, the Department of Defense doesn't see one government agency as being more important than the next. So they get put into a queue. But if you call the White House and go, hey, boss, this is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, 75 doctors, all the medicines I can carry, I really need to be on the ground up there in the city of New York. And the White House says go, you become a 1 Alpha 1. We will push baby food out of the back of the next available heavy lift Air Force asset to get you where the White House wants you to be. So now our phones are ringing off the hook. All these government agencies requesting 1 Alpha 1. We're pushing it up to the Deputy White House Chief of Staff who's going, approved, approved, approved. Now we're on the phone with the Pentagon. Divert every aircraft, heavy lift Air Force asset out of the sky. Get them on the ground at Andrews Air Force Base, 15 miles to the east. Rack them and stack them, meaning fill them full of gas, park them on the taxiways. There's going to be a wave of people and resources coming across Washington. The White House, the president, wants everything to New York City. The true heroes that we trust our lives with every single day, doing what they're trained to do. In times of national emergency, what's the first thing I do? Is mitigate its effects by getting people away from the impact site. That's what they were doing. Port Authority police officers clearing out those 2 towers. Firemen rushing to and up those stairs. Police officers made every entry exit place into Manhattan Island a one-way street off the island. That's what we want to do, is mitigate it by getting people away. Our heroes jumped into action, doing what they're trained to do, saving thousands of lives. Here's our president. He's sitting in the Emma E. Booker Elementary School, Sarasota, Florida. Let's just be the president for a moment. He came from Texas. He's our commander-in-chief for 8 months. All of a sudden, his chief of staff walks into a classroom full of young kids and whispers in his ear, Mr. President, a second airliner has just struck the South Tower. America is under attack. Along the back wall of that classroom is a traveling White House press corps. Their BlackBerries are going off. They got the same information he just got. He's got to make a decision. Do I get about, or do I stay here and let my military members and professional staffers on the other side of that wall do their job? We have a traveling White House situation room. Our job in that situation room is options for the president, situational awareness for the president. Our job is to create situational awareness, develop courses of action, deliver them to him, and he picks one, and then he executes on a course of action. He decided, I'm staying in this classroom. I want my people to do their job on the other side of that wall. He finally had an option. We finally developed some situational awareness. He made his final remarks at 9:30 from the M.E. Booker Elementary School, and they whisked him back to Sarasota, Florida, about as fast as they can drive. I'm allowed to tell you all this. Times of national emergency, we always want the president airborne. We never want our president to be stuck in a bunker, unable to be seen or heard by the American public. He's got to be visual, in communication with the other member of the National Command Authority and our combatant commanders around the world and the American public. And that was the goal on 9/11, get the president airborne. And that's what they were trying to do at 9:30. We're working the 1 Alpha 1s. We're on the phone with the Pentagon when all of a sudden an airliner overflew the White House. I will tell you, this airliner was so large and so loud, everybody froze right there in their tracks. Somebody finally ran to the window, looked out and said, holy mackerel, I just saw a big white jet in a hard left-hand turn heading west. We got breaking news. We have a fire and explosion over at the Pentagon. The Pentagon was just struck by American Airlines Flight 77. That plane departed out of Dulles, 30 miles to the west, went as far as Ohio, hijacked right back to Washington, D.C. It made a right-hand 360 over Reagan National Airport and careened into the west side of the Pentagon at 9:37. That was not the airplane that just overflew the White House. If you remember back then, we were doing a large Air Force nuclear military command and control exercise. We parked one of our national assets, an Air Force E-4B, a 747 with a weird cone on top. It was parked at Andrews for the exercise, and when the second tower was struck, the Pentagon activated that aircrew and that airplane with missions to get to the President of the United States. If the President wants to climb off Air Force One and climb onto NAOC, the National Airborne Operations Center, the Doomsday plane, these two 747s need to go figure out a place to land and make the switch. When that plane came out of Andrews and put a laser line to Sarasota, Florida, it made a left-hand 360 flying right over the White House, prohibited airspace. That's what got the Secret Service entering Vice President Cheney's office, picked him up by his elbows, and now was rushing him underground that day to safety. And what's going to be the President's Emergency Operations Center, the bunker under the White House. All of a sudden, the loudspeakers blared to life. Evacuate the White House. Evacuate the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. Everyone secure your classified information and go to the alternate site. My boss, that colonel, came in and said, "You heard him. Shut it down. We're out of here. We got to go." I said, "Colonel, I can't leave. President Bush is not coming back. We have an attack in New York, an attack on the Pentagon. Someone overflew prohibited airspace here at the White House. Wherever they're going to take him, he needs snipers, doctors, limousines, phones. He needs the package." He goes, "You can't stay here. Grab the planning kit, go across the street, go underground, go inside the bunker complex known as the President's Emergency Operations Center, and do logistics." Roger that. Everybody else, we're out of here. I grabbed the planning kit and I'm heading out of the Eisenhower building adjacent to the West Wing. I had to stop just for a minute and just take it all in. The White House is arguably the most secure piece of real estate in the world. And on 9/11, they had the gates to the south wide open. The gates to the north were wide open. Everyone had an automatic weapon. And the Secret Service were yelling in bullhorns, "Ladies, take off your heels and run. There's another plane inbound." Watching these professional staffers drop their purse, kick off their heels, and sprint off the most secure piece of real estate in the world was an unbelievable sight. I got across the street. I showed my credentials. Secret Service lets me in. Before long, I'm underground. I'm standing before a door you and I don't pull on. A bank vault on steroids. It's called the Emergency Operations Center, the PEOC. Most of the staffers, 95% of the staffers that worked upstairs, didn't even know it existed. They had no reason ever to be there. It was built back in the 60s as a nuclear-hardened facility. It's run by the White House Military Office. It's now going to become the main hub of operations. I request permission to enter. The door opens. The door closes. I'm inside a place pretty special. I'm deep underground in this nuclear-hardened facility. First person I see is the Vice President's military aide, a good friend of mine. His name was Tom. I go, "Tom, I'm here to do logistics. I'll stay out of your way." He said, "Bob, forget logistics. I need help. The phones are ringing off the hook." So now you're in an op center, a bunch of computers, TV screens, military members doing their job. As I looked at the end of the line, I could see an empty desk, an empty cubicle. As I got closer to it, the phone was ringing. Try to imagine now, I ran over there and I dropped the planning kit. 7 minutes after the White House was ordered evacuated, I picked up a receiver. This is my first phone call that day. It came from the West Wing Situation Room, now down into the bunker complex. When it was 9:52 when I answered, the gentleman on the other end said, "Major, we have another hijacked aircraft 16 miles south of Pittsburgh, inbound, Washington, D.C. Naturally, I said, "Whoa. You're going to have to hold on." And I turned to my right to tell Tom, the military aide, and who's standing next to me but Vice President Cheney. Behind him was his wife, Lynn. Here comes Dr. Rice, her deputy, Stephen Hadley. Norman Mineta, our Secretary of Transportation. Everyone who was in the West Wing was now evacuated into the bunker, coming over to my console to hear about this new hijacked aircraft. I immediately snapped to, Mr. Vice President, sir, we got another one coming at us somewhere south of Pittsburgh, 16 miles south of Pittsburgh. He turned away from me. Down in the bunker on the wall there are these 3 black boxes. They're speaker boxes. They're landlines. He can be patched through to whoever he wants to talk to. He said, get me the Herndon, Virginia Command Center for the FAA. The supervisor's name was Rick. He came up in the network. He goes, Rick, I was just told we have another hijacked aircraft coming at us. Can you confirm that for me? Mr. Vice President, that aircraft is not talking. It's not squawking a transponder code, giving air traffic control, airspeed, altitude, and direction. Sir, that aircraft is way off course. That's a hijacked aircraft. He turns to the second speaker box. Hey, Don, are you up? He's looking for the other member of the National Command Authority, the Secretary of Defense, who can give offensive, lethal instructions to the U.S. military. But Donald Rumsfeld is not there. They entered his office at 8:46 and said, Mr. Secretary, we need you downstairs in the National Military Command Center. He said, listen, I'm going to stick with my daily schedule. Keep me apprised of what's going on. At 9:03, they re-entered his office. Mr. Secretary, we need you downstairs in the National Military Command Center. He said, listen, I'm due for a CIA briefing in 2 minutes. Keep me apprised of what's going on. At 9:37, when the Pentagon was struck by American Airlines Flight 77, his desk literally shook. He got up out of his office and he ran outside in the parking lot to assist with evacuating the wounded. A pretty admirable thing to do, but not his appointed place of duty. We have a president trying to get airborne, a Secretary of Defense lost in the parking lot at the Pentagon. No one at the helm to tell our pilots, our National Military Command and Control operation, our pilots, what the rules of engagement are. Just then, Vice President Cheney, talking to a 1-star general, goes, General, I want you to listen to me. I want 2 F-15s. I want them out of Otis Air National Guard Base, Cape Cod. Let me know when they're airborne. Stand by to shoot this aircraft down. I remember I took a step back from the vice president, covered the receiver, and I stared at him just for a moment. My 14 years in the Marine Corps taught me our job is options for the president. And we just unleashed the United States Air Force to take lethal action against a civilian airliner. I realized at that very moment, you're not talking to an ordinary politician. He's a congressman from Wyoming, a chief of staff for President Ford, a secretary of defense for the first President Bush, and now vice president of the United States. He didn't say, get me fighters. He knew we had F-15s on alert at Otis, F-16s in Langley, Virginia, F-18s in Jacksonville, Florida. This is a man who wrote those war plans. It turned out we couldn't have had a better crisis leader at the helm at that very moment in time. Next thing you know, we heard F-15s were airborne. They were supersonic over Long Island, New York. For those of us who don't know that, supersonic is a little bit over 1,200 miles per hour at sea level. They are closing in on United Flight 93. They wanted to be confirmed weapons-free to engage. Without hesitation, Vice President Cheney said, you are weapons-free. Shoot that aircraft down. It was like the air sucked out of the room, all eyes on the vice president. He's staring at those 3 speaker boxes when all of a sudden, at 10:05, all the satellite radios blared to life. Aircraft down. Aircraft down. 68 miles south of Pittsburgh, no survivors. All eyes on the vice president. He turned around. He walked right over to me and he goes, Major, for the congressional investigation, state your full name. You know what I was thinking? No. I don't know if now's a good time to tell you this, but I'm here to do logistics. But I snapped out of it, put my heels together. Sir, it's Major Darling. He goes, from Major Darling to the Vice President to the National Military Command Center, we just shot that plane down I really need to talk to the president. Everybody's going, Air Force One, this is the KACo. And as we were trying to reach the president, those same satellite radios blared to life. F-15s never fired. The F-15s never fired. United Flight 93 was on the ground in Shanksville, Pennsylvania when they got there. Think about this, folks. 40 ordinary Americans boarded that plane in Newark, New Jersey, on their way to San Francisco, talking to loved ones, 3 planes, 3 targets. We're not going to Cuba. We fight or we die. Tom Burnett, Todd Beamer, 38 others united themselves in combat. We believe they got in the cockpit, hands on terrorists. Ultimately, that plane rolled completely upside down and hit straight down in a field at over 500 miles per hour. When the FBI finished combing the wreckage, they found the last piece of aircraft 40 feet in the dirt. That's how hard that plane hit the ground. They found many indicators that the goal of these terrorists was to strike the dome on the U.S. Capitol. Their mission that day was to strike our financial capital in New York, the military capital, i.e. the Pentagon, and ultimately our symbol of freedom, the dome on the U.S. Capitol. But these ordinary Americans united themselves and had something to say about that and stopped these terrorists from succeeding in that mission. Just then, the president's now talking to the vice president during the bunker complex. They put 2 classified programs immediately into effect. First time in history, these 2 programs simultaneously went into effect. Essentially, I'm allowed to say this much about them. Continuity of presidency and continuity of government are now in effect. The president, the vice president, the Speaker of the House can no longer be in the same geographical area. We got to put some miles between the president and vice president. That's why Air Force One made a hard left heading west. Continuity of government. Our 3 branches need to go to their hardened facilities, come up on the network. So no matter what happens in the world, our democracy must survive. Our leadership must survive. That's what these 2 programs are designed to do. You know who else we care about in Congress? Was the Senate pro temp. But that was Strom Thurmond at the time. The guy was like 108 years old. We weren't evacuating Strom Thurmond. They literally gave him a bowl of soup, told him the stock market was up. It was over for Strom Thurmond. Back to bed for Strom. But we had to get Dennis Hastert out of Washington, D.C. He became a high priority mission. President, vice president, let's get Dennis Hastert. Over here on the left, that's the executive side of the bunker complex. You'll never see a photo beyond the presidential seal. That's where we have our classified radios and computers and equipment. But you see lots of photos from the conference room. Karen Hughes came with President Bush from Texas, speechwriter. There's Commander Barnes down low. Dr. Rice, her deputy behind her. Mary Madeline, married to James Carville, was an aide to Vice President Cheney. She was there that day with the vice president working the phones. It gets really busy from here on out. We just got past Flight 93. The president and vice president had a moment to talk about it when all of a sudden over my right shoulder, I heard all this commotion. People were yelling up at the TV set. CNN had just reported that the South Tower of the World Trade Center complex has just collapsed. I'll never forget this moment because what people were seeing and hearing on the TV was not what they were ready or mentally able to comprehend. They were literally yelling at the TV set, going, that's not true. There's no way a 110-story building in a city of 6 million could be on the ground up there. Mr. Vice President, we've probably lost the first 20 floors. The antenna broke off. He goes, everyone, just stop. Just stop. Does anyone know how many people work there? Someone said, sir, 7 buildings in the World Trade Center complex, 50,000 people in those 2 towers alone. He said, get me the president, and he started to scribble. President Bush literally came up in the network right back again. He goes, Mr. President, it's my best guess. We have 20,000 dead Americans in the city of New York as a result of losing the South Tower. Mr. President, while I got you on the phone, a portion of the Pentagon has just collapsed as a result of the impact of Flight 77. Again, my best guess is we have 800 to 1,000 dead over at the Pentagon. He finally reached down and took the president off speaker box, turned his back to all of us, and they had a private 15-second, 20-second conversation before they hung up the phone. My phone was now ringing off the hook. I picked it up. This time it's about 10:12. When I answered it, it was the Secret Service calling into the bunker complex, going, "Major, we are tracking an unidentified aircraft 8 miles out, inbound to the White House." An unidentified aircraft, when we don't know what it is, we call it a bogey. If we identify him as being a hostile, we'll call him a bandit. If he's a friendly, he's a friendly. We don't know what it is. I turned, "Mr. Vice President, sir, we got a bogey 7 miles out, low and fast, inbound to the White House." He turned 3 speaker boxes. Donald Rumsfeld is back in the building at the Pentagon. "Don, we got a bogey 6 miles out coming at us." Do I have an asset that can take a shot at this guy? Do I have an F-15, an F-16, an F-18, anything over Washington, D.C. I can engage him with? He goes, "We're checking." I go, "Mr. Vice President, 6, 5, 4. He goes, "Don, I'll authorize an over-the-horizon shot." Meaning if you got a radar-guided missile over Baltimore and you can lock onto him, shoot him. Shoot him. Shoot him. "Mr. Vice President, 3, 2. He goes, "Stop. Stop counting. If the Secret Service can't deal with it on the roof, everyone stand by for impact." I remember putting my hands on the console in front of me going, the world's greatest military superpower just said checkmate. We don't have a fighter aircraft over Washington. We're going to take a body blow right here at the White House. There are hundreds of people being cleared to the south and pushed to the north when all of a sudden, all the loudspeakers blared to life. That's not a bogey. That's a medevac helicopter heading to the Pentagon, talking on the wrong frequency. 10 miles to the south of Washington, D.C. is Fort Belvoir. 6 Army doctors heard we had hundreds of burn victims at the Pentagon. They commandeered an HH-60 helicopter and they started racing towards Washington, D.C. When they got 5 miles south and they called for permission to enter the airspace, they called Reagan National Tower. Nobody answered them back. Reagan Tower had evacuated as a result of the flyover of Flight 77. They did one turn in holding and they said, "We got lives to save. Let's get as low and as fast as possible. Get us to the Pentagon." And these aircrew dove down to sea level and were scooting over buildings trying to make it to the Pentagon. When Secret Service sensors picked them up and we were doing our very best to try to kill them, it would have been a horrible tragedy. We would have called it fog of war. It worked out for us that day that we didn't have a missile over Washington or Baltimore. And these doctors made it to where they're supposed to be. I will tell you, though, it was the first time I saw Vice President Cheney a little bit frazzled. He literally walked over to the Secretary of Transportation and put his hand on his shoulder and said, "Norm, that was close. I need you to do me a favor. Every airplane, coast to coast, on the ground, do it now. I don't mean ground stops in New York, Boston, and LA. I mean get every airplane out of the sky, figure it out." He called the Herndon, Virginia Command Center. The Secretary of Transportation said, on orders from the White House, clear the skies over the United States. They literally came back and said, they are 2,000 airliners still airborne. We are not manned to sequence and land 2,000 planes at once. The moment they admitted that, on all the military frequencies, we heard this is the North American Aero Defense Command. This is NORAD. We are assuming airspace control over the United States. If you're not a military aircraft, you're no longer authorized to be in the skies over America. Land immediately, land immediately, land immediately. The FAA became a subordinate agency to the United States Air Force to help sequence over 2,000 airliners at the same time to clear the skies for the first time in history over the United States. The plane that overflew the White House, the Doomsday plane, the National Airborne Ops Center, was now reported to be in position. If the president wanted to get off NAOC or get off Air Force One and climb on NAOC, like I said, these two 747s need to go and figure it out. Adding to the confusion of the day, we got a report there was an explosion over on Capitol Hill and another explosion at the U.S. State Department. We don't have an air attack on the Northeast Quadrant. We potentially have an air-ground attack. Vice President Cheney turned to Dr. Rice, goes, "Condi, figure it out." She picked up the phone, called the Capitol Hill police. They said, "Ma'am, we're doing an orderly evacuation, no explosion here." Great. She called over to the State Department. They said, "Yes, ma'am, we had an event." She's got her hand up to the Vice President going, "We got an event at the State Department." He goes, "I need to know more. What do you got?" They came back and said, "No car bomb. Our backup generator exploded when we turned it on." I tell you, check your backup generators once in a while. Somebody put milk in that thing. And sure enough, adding to the fog of war, but thank God it wasn't a car bomb. I'll never forget this call a few minutes later when Secret Service dialed into the bunker and said, "Major, credible source, Sarasota, Florida area, Angel is the next target." Angel is a Secret Service code word for the president when he's on board Air Force One. Every president's got a Secret Service code word. Ronald Reagan, Rawhide. President Bush, Angel. President Clinton, Player. They all had their Secret Service. You know, I was just kidding about that. I just wanted to see if you were listening. And I think it's playa. I don't think I say it right. Anyway, but they put Angel in the conversation. What does that mean? Do we have a rogue White House Secret Service agent or press member who put the conversation Angel, mixed up the code word in the conversation? We don't know what the threat is. Do we have somebody on board Air Force One? A rogue White House press member or Secret Service member? Or do we have somebody trying to ram Air Force One or shoot it down? Vice President Cheney picked up a receiver. He called Colonel Mark Tillman, the Air Force One pilot, directly. "We got a threat against the president. We don't know any details about it, but take evasive maneuvers." They put President Bush in the nose of the aircraft. White House press corps, back in your seats. Nobody's allowed to transmit or nobody's allowed to receive. Air traffic control, you're no longer allowed to track or report the position of Air Force One. We're going to go into a complete communications blackout. Colonel Tillman pulled the nose of that aircraft back, 4 engines to max power. They went to 50,000 feet heading west at almost 700 miles an hour. If you're going to ram Air Force One, you better bring your F-16. There's not a lot happening at those altitudes and airspeeds. They ended up scrambling 2 F-16s at an Ellington Air National Guard base in Houston and said, "Get to 50,000 feet. You'll figure it out when you get up there." Another little bit of irony. President Bush was a pilot in the Texas Air National Guard. That was his unit that was now scrambled to protect him on 9/11. He literally had his squadron mates on either side of him that day, escorting him safely to the west. It was 10 minutes now since Vice President Cheney ordered the skies over America clear. He now picked up the receiver talking to the Pentagon and said, "You are authorized to shoot down any aircraft still pointing at Washington, D.C. If somebody's flying his daddy's Cessna on the wrong side of the Potomac River, shoot him down. If somebody's trying to get into Reagan, Manassas, or Dulles and figured out what's going on in the world, shoot them down." The Pentagon said, "Roger that. And by the way, we got a Navy DDG, a guided missile destroyer off the coast of New York, tracking 60 targets. 60 airliners told to land for the very last time in Newark, JFK, or LaGuardia." Vice President Cheney's response, "Good. I want a missile solution for every one of them. If somebody's not complying, I want them shot down sooner, not later." All of a sudden, President Bush, it was a moment in history where he sort of got his sea legs. He came up on the network. He goes, I want to have an air threat conference. I want every cabinet level secretary to get to their Iridium phone and dial me on Air Force One. I want to know what's happening in their area of responsibility and what they're doing about it. Roger that. Instantaneously, the call goes out. Everyone's patched through. They're all talking to the president. They're going around the horn, telling the president what they're doing to defend America. It came over to Donald Rumsfeld's turn, our Secretary of Defense. He goes, Mr. President, given the events of the day, I recommend we take our nuclear weapons from DEFCON 4, Defense Condition 4, up to Defense Condition 3, DEFCON 3. 5 is peace, 1 is imminent nuclear war. President Bush said, you know what? It's a great idea. Have them stand by for DEFCON 2. I will tell you, when a DEFCON condition changes, every military service just moves. No phone calls required. Ships get out of port, submarines to launch depth, bombers get loaded, bases get hardened, recall rosters go out. It doesn't matter if you're in Australia, Japan, Germany, or the United States. A DEFCON condition goes to a higher state. We just move. It was the quickest way to get the American military back to work worldwide. Dr. Rice, sitting next to me, she grabbed my huge bicep and she said, see, that really wasn't a joke. I don't know why anybody's laughing. But she said, Major, we haven't been to DEFCON 2 since the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962. And I looked at her too and I was like, I know. I didn't know. But when things are happening around you and everything's amped up, you don't want to be the guy in the room going, no shit, I didn't know. You got to up your game a little bit. You got to get with it. I'm like, sure, I was there, sure. Yeah. And Cheney interrupts her and goes, Condi, make it happen. And I'm sitting next to the National Security Advisor. She reached across my console. She grabbed that red phone. She called over to the Pentagon. Executive order of the President of the United States, take our strategic nuclear forces from DEFCON 4 to DEFCON 3, stand by DEFCON 2. Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, home of NORAD, buttoned up the mountain for the first time in anger. And now we heard that 4-star general call our 4-star combatant commanders around the world. And we're listening into this, and we hear this is Pacific Command, Atlantic Command, Central Command, European Command, Southern Command, Joint Forces Command, Special Operations Command, Strategic Command. This is NORAD. We are DEFCON 3, standing by DEFCON 2. A pivotal moment in American history where we went from taking body blows from terrorists to now being an offensive nuclear superpower. We're going to war. We just don't know who we're going to war with. Just then, my phone's ringing off the hook. I pick it up. Situation room, calling downstairs, going, Major, I have President Putin holding for the President of the United States. Sir, will you take the call? And I'm thinking, no. Tell Putin I'm here to do logistics. But I cover the receiver and I yell out loud, Mr. Vice President, I got President Putin on the phone. Sir, will you take the call? Cheney's shoulders slumped over, but like the great leader he was, he goes, hey, Condi, you take the call. You know what I wrote in my notebook? I said, leadership equals delegation. When you don't want to do it, you pass it off. So now Dr. Rice, sitting next to me, is talking to President Putin. I'm thinking, how are we going to do this? Russian? What are we going to do? And sure enough, it was plain English, nothing evasive, through a White House interpreter. Mr. President, thank you for your phone call. Our president is in motion. We don't know the size and scope of the attack. We don't know if it's over. He's going to call you the first chance he gets. And by the way, Mr. President, thank you for standing down your nuclear forces. And she hung up. The rest of us are like, what the hell does that mean? I quickly got educated that part of our strategic nuclear alliance, our START treaty that the U.S. has with Russia, whenever one country goes to a higher state of nuclear readiness, we call them, either State Department, Department of Defense, to announce it. It's fair if we go 3, they go 2, 1, 1. It's fair if the missiles pass each other. It's not fair for those of us who want to live on this planet. They stayed at DEFCON 4. America went worldwide, DEFCON 3. Saddest moment in history, we lost the North Tower. A bunch of upset people in disbelief. 2 110-story buildings on the ground in the city of New York. Vice President Cheney said, "Get me the president." He came up on the network, "Mr. President, sir, we lost the North Tower." My best guess, 40,000 dead Americans in the city of New York. All of a sudden, the president came back, said, "Anybody speak to Mayor Giuliani?" "No, sir, no conversations with the mayor." "What are the hospitals telling us, Dick, right now as far as dead and wounded?" "Sir, no reports from any hospitals." "What about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency? Where are they? What can they tell me?" "Sir, FEMA hasn't even left yet." An hour and 45 minutes after the attack in America, it takes a lot longer to get everybody flown up to JFK, escorted into Manhattan. It's going to take hours and hours. We had no good news for the president. 315 million Americans counting on him, and that's the only advice we could pass on to him at that time. Pretty sad moment. 10:45, we got all the federal buildings evacuated, Senate leadership. He's where I said he was, Speaker of the House. We got to get him into the mountain. Everybody else is in communication with the White House. 11 o'clock, at least 10 airliners not complying with NORAD. For whatever reason, 300 people sitting behind these pilots. They don't know what's going on in the world. If they missed where NORAD was going to take them or wanted them to be, we deemed them potentially hijacked, and now we're scrambling fighter jets all over America to escort them down on the ground. I just have to put a plug in for air traffic control for 1 second. The people we entrust our lives to. First time in history, FAA is not in charge, military is, FAA is helping them. At any given hour, we could have 100 medevac flights in progress around our country. If we would have ordered all those helicopters with car accident victims, snake bite victims, people who were severely hurt, out of the sky and said, land in that farmer's field, all those people would have died. Through the coordination of air traffic control, FAA, and NORAD, we got every medevac to a hospital with a military call sign and transponder code. We landed over 4,000 aircraft that day. We didn't run off one runway, clip one wing, lose one patient to a diabetic coma. The people we entrust our lives to certainly know what they're doing. We have much to be thankful for. Very, very impressive, folks. 11:48. Now try to remember this moment. I gave you there's a threat against Angel. We are DEFCON 3. And the first time I saw Vice President Cheney visibly upset because CNN was filming the arrival of Air Force One into Barksdale, Louisiana. He said if the terrorists don't know where the president is, apparently he just landed in Barksdale, Louisiana. Couldn't believe that the Air Force was letting CNN still film the arrival of Air Force One. I got to tell you, as a Marine, I took a little bit of joy in that. Air Force was on the hot seat, brought me a little bit of pleasure. 11:58, Colin Powell, former chairman, now Secretary of State. He's wheels up. He's out of Lima, Peru. He's coming back to the United States. I'm tracking it. Finally, we had this guy. We got another bogey, folks. This time it's heading for the president's ranch in Crawford, Texas. I reported to the vice president. He was so anxious about it, he grabbed the phone away from me. He's talking to the general at the Pentagon. He goes, do not let this guy get to the president's ranch in Crawford, Texas. You are cleared hot. Do whatever you have to do. They scrambled 2 F-16s out of San Antonio. Your weapons free to engage. They are supersonic, tracking this bad guy down. However, when they got there, they didn't find a bad guy. They found a crop duster. You guys know, crop dusters are drinking the cognac, dropping the DEET, that little Bon Jovi in their right ear. They have no idea what's going on in the world. And 2 F-16s at 1,200 miles an hour went right by them. We're lucky that little airplane didn't fold up like luggage. They went vertical, called us back and said, trust us, that guy is no threat. We made a joke in the bunker saying when that pilot sobered up and drove over to see the sheriff, he said, I just saw 2 UFOs, no joke. 13:45, President's wheels up. He decides to go out to Nebraska, home of Strategic Command. He eventually, something very significant happened when he was out there. He canceled continuity of presidency and said, I'm on my way home. I'll be home at 6:30 When I get back, I want another presidential daily brief. You know, the CIA briefs the president every day at 8. He got a brief in Sarasota, Florida. That was obviously inadequate. He wants another one. He's coming home. Dr. Rice scrambling black Suburbans all over Washington, D.C. If you got something for the president, it better make its way back in here. President Bush is coming home. He made it home at 6:30. They took him to the bunker complex. That's Attorney General Ashcroft, President Bush, Andy Card, Tenet from CIA, Richard Clark. On the far right-hand side, 2 generals, Donald Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, Dr. Rice, Don Evans. Nobody gets in after the president. Literally, we sat there watching through a one-way window, and they're going around the table giving the president the update. When it was his turn, he looked up and said, FEMA, where are you? Here, Mr. President. Joe Alba, get to New York. Bring a checkbook. I hear it's a mess up there. You can go. Transportation, where are you, Norm? Here, Mr. President. Norm, I want planes, trains, and automobiles up and operating by noon tomorrow. Figure it out. I want to see my national security team upstairs in 5 minutes. The rest of you, thanks for coming. America's going to war. He's now got to brief the American public, and he's going to talk to us all at 8:30 that night. He makes his remarks that we are attacked by a non-conventional force, a radical Islamic ideology, a terrorist organization known as Al-Qaeda. They're hiding in Afghanistan. We got to create options for the president. And when they briefed him, they brought him 3 options. I'm allowed to tell you this much about him. Option number 1, we could put 100 Tomahawk cruise missiles in the air in 30 minutes, striking targets in and around Afghanistan. President Bush said, we're not doing that again. You cannot fly 100 Tomahawks through a sovereign nation's airspace, i.e. Pakistan. That means you got to tell them they're coming. And then Pakistan, like they did in the past, would call Afghanistan, the Taliban, who would tip Al-Qaeda off, and bin Laden would escape. He said, I want option 2. 300,000 troops halfway around the world. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way, boots on the ground. We're going to Camp David to do the planning this weekend. Let's get ready for war. I got to tell you folks, as we get to the end of this, I had an opportunity to bring a small contingent of White House staffers up to Ground Zero about September 23rd. Listen, way too soon. In the eyes of our first responders, it was not a recovery mission. It was still a rescue mission in progress. Bucket by bucket, they were looking for somebody still alive. And yet they came off the pile to come into this makeshift op center to talk to these staffers. And I'll never forget what the fireman said. He came in and said, listen, folks, there's 13 stories of carnage. There are no desks, escalators, elevators, chairs. There are no computers. And everything eviscerates at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit with all that friction and jet fuel and everything and all those floors coming down into ash, glass, and twisted steel. Places too hot to touch 3 weeks later. There were beams out there. If we joined hands, we couldn't get our arms around that were ripped like paper, torn and deformed from the heat. 13 stories high. Blocks away from Ground Zero when we went walking around, there were water mains sticking straight through the road. All that plumbing has got to go somewhere when it comes down. And under the streets, some major pipes burst and a water main would come right through the road. Try to imagine 750,000 people running and a water main come through the street right next to you. It must have truly been Armageddon. More of the same, shocked people. I want to give you a clear look at the hole in the ground up there. This picture right here became my professional why. This is a quote by George Bush, President George Bush, in front of a joint session of Congress when he told the whole world, I will not forget the wound to our country and those who have inflicted it. I will not yield, I will not rest, I will not relent in waging this struggle for the security of the American people, for freedom and the security of the American people, President George W. Bush. And neither will I, and neither will all of you. So in closing, I want to tell you all today, now you get it. Now you know why I'm here. Now you know why I came to say thank you. Thank you for doing what you do, not only for your communities and your counties and each other, but the strength of America lies with all of you. You represent the greatest part of our country. You bring strength to our nation. So don't underestimate why you're here and what you want to accomplish. This conference that takes place every year is a lot more than just getting to know your peers or doing a business deal. This is about hardening the fiber of our great nation. So when terrorist comes to this state or our country again, you all are ready to roll. You're ready to rock. you're ready to defend this great country of ours. I want to say in closing, thank you for allowing me to be here today. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America.